Most of what I'm about to share happened over a decade ago. It was 2014. I was 14 years old, trapped in the midst of a clumsy and turbulent adolescence. We had just moved into a new house in a neighborhood that felt alien. New school, new friends, and an unfamiliar neighborhood made me feel like I was on a different planet. For me, moving didn't bring a new beginning, but simply changed the stage for the same old show. At school, I became an easy target. I was quiet, awkward, and didn't have many friends. Bullying became a daily occurrence. Taunts in the hallway, shoves into lockers, and snide remarks in class. At home, the atmosphere wasn't much better. My parents often fought, creating a tension that made me feel it was better to be outside. One afternoon, trying to escape the chaos at home, I discovered a small path at the end of our street that led to a small patch of woods. I explored it, and in the middle of the trees, I found a clearing among the pine trees that formed a natural room. It was here, under the thick canopy of leaves, that I found peace. There were no insults, no shouts, just the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. "This place is my fortress," I mumbled to myself. I started spending every afternoon there. Sometimes I even brought my school books so my parents would think I was studying. But I never did. I just sat, listened to nature, and let my mind wander. One night, I accidentally fell asleep. When I woke up, the sun had already risen. I was terrified, but no one was looking for me. There wasn't even a phone call from my parents. The feeling was a mix of intoxicating freedom and deep sadness. From then on, the fortress in the woods became my second home. I started camping there a few times a week. To survive there, I needed equipment. Asking my parents for money was impossible. They rarely had extra cash, and if they did, it was for bills. So, I found my own way. I started offering lawn mowing services door to door. I worked with a neighbor's old lawnmower, which I used after promising to take good care of it. With the money I collected, I bought equipment from a thrift store, a worn-out military backpack, a flickering flashlight, and an old sleeping bag. I felt like a soldier preparing for a war only I knew about. For the next few years, I lived in two worlds. On one hand, I was the awkward, quiet high school student. On the other, I was the master of my fortress, an explorer who knew every bend of the small creek and every fallen tree. I felt strong and powerful in my own place, and I wasn't afraid to protect it from anyone who dared to disturb it. One afternoon, as I was sitting by the river, I saw a white van stop on the road across the creek. Two men were getting in and out of the van. They didn't look like ordinary fishermen or hikers. They were talking loudly and occasionally shooting a gun toward the water. My anger flared. They were disturbing the peace of my sanctuary. When a bullet ricocheted off a rock near me, I knew I had to act. I ran home and called the police station. With a trembling voice, I said I was lost and saw two men shooting a gun. I lied that they had threatened me with a weapon because I knew no one would listen to a child's story about his sanctuary. A few days later, I heard the news on the radio. The police had raided a mobile drug lab thanks to an anonymous tip. They found the two men and a large amount of drugs. Instantly, an icy fear pierced me. I had done something far bigger than just protecting my fortress. After they were sentenced to 20 years in prison, I thought it was over. But then the first letter came. "You don't know who you're messing with, kid." The second letter, "We remember your face." The third, "Wait for us to get out." I don't know how they found my identity. Maybe they saw me on the street as I ran home. What's clear is that the fear was real. I started spending all my time in the fortress. I thought if something were to happen, I wanted it to happen in the place I loved. But day after day passed, and nothing happened. Slowly, I began to think it was just a bluff. My life moved on. I graduated, moved, and built a new life. Until last week, an anonymous letter appeared at my apartment. "We're coming back for you." The words froze me. The ghost of my past had returned. Now, I'm afraid for my wife and my child. I'm afraid for everything I've built. I don't know what to do, and I'm writing this because I can only hope that by sharing this story, I will get a little relief from the shadow that continues to follow me. Growing up in a bustling Texas suburb, my friends and I never considered camping an appealing vacation option. We preferred spending time at the mall, movies, or other entertainment venues. The idea of sleeping in a cramped tent, eating dehydrated food, and being surrounded by bugs sounded more like a punishment than a holiday. City life offered everything we needed, so why bother going to the woods? However, my view of nature changed drastically when I started college in Denton, Texas. During my 4 years there, I underwent a transformation from a naive city kid to an individual with a much deeper appreciation for nature. This change began in the most unexpected way. I roomed with a young man who grew up in East Texas, someone with extensive knowledge of the outdoors. He and his friends often went on camping trips, and during one spring break, they invited me to join them. My first trip was to Lake Ray Roberts, a famous lake near Denton. I came with no experience, armed only with borrowed gear and one essential item I had purchased, a powerful bug spray. Thanks to the spray's protection, I was able to focus entirely on this new experience. I learned how to set up a tent, build a campfire, and stargaze. That adventure opened my eyes to a beauty in nature I had never experienced before. I was hooked, and from that moment on, I joined every camping trip they planned. Over time, my wilderness survival skills improved dramatically. I spent my free time honing my abilities. My old friends from the city were surprised by this change. They even said they barely recognized me anymore. I felt like I had found a new identity, and I promised myself I would never again turn away from nature. However, there was one experience that changed everything, an experience that still haunts me to this day and makes me hesitant to ever set foot in the woods again. It was my final semester break. Most of my camping friends had already graduated or moved away. I decided to take a solo trip to Sam Houston National Forest, located on the eastern side of the state. I had read some warnings about potential dangers, including careless hunters, but I was confident there would be no problems. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, quickly set up my tent, and prepared to explore the area. As I walked, I felt a strange sensation. I felt like I was being watched, even though there was no one around. The uneasy feeling made me cancel my walking plans and return to the campsite. The night passed without incident. The next morning, the air was crisp. The forest seemed peaceful. I decided to explore a hiking trail. The first few hours felt calm. I only heard the sounds of nature, rustling leaves, cracking twigs, and birds chirping. As I rested, waiting for the water on my portable stove to boil, I saw a quick movement from behind a bush. Suddenly, a hoarse sound came from a raven, as if giving a warning. That same uneasy feeling returned. I continued my journey, but this time with a heightened sense of caution. Before long, I realized I was not alone. The sound of slow footsteps followed me. I tried to walk faster, but the sound also sped up. The peaceful silence that had been there before turned eerie. Then a strange odor wafted through the air. It smelled like wet soil and iron. I stopped, and at that very moment, the forest became completely silent. My heart pounded. I knew something was wrong. I bravely walked toward the smell, but just a few steps in, a handful of pine needles and mud was thrown next to me. The next second, I heard a loud crack from behind me. I turned around and another sound came, this time from a different direction. I realized I was in danger. I immediately dropped to the ground. I screamed, hoping the person would realize they were targeting a human, not an animal. However, there was no answer. After a long silence, I got up. The strange smell was still there, and for some reason curiosity took over. I walked back toward the source of the smell. This time, a deafening barrage of gunshots came from the opposite direction. I didn't think twice. I immediately turned and ran with all my might. Another shot rang out behind me, and I could hear the bullet whizzing past my ear. Suddenly, I felt a sharp tug on my right shoulder, as if something had violently pulled my jacket. I kept running, but I felt a stinging, burning sensation. My jacket felt cold, and when I touched it, my fingers were wet and sticky. I didn't dare to stop. I just ran, prayed, and didn't stop until my body couldn't take it anymore. Another shot sounded behind me, but I was too focused on escaping. When I finally stopped, I looked at my shoulder. My shirt was torn, and there were bloodstains on the fabric. I realized the bullet had only grazed my shoulder. Although no more shots were heard, I didn't dare to stop. I gulped down some water, took a deep breath, and continued my escape. That experience changed me forever. The forest, which was once a place of refuge, had now become a place filled with fear. It was spring of 2017. After years of planning and training, I finally embarked on a true solo journey into the wilderness, a long-desired test of endurance and survival skills. As a bushcraft enthusiast and a veteran member of a shooting club, I had spent years honing my navigation skills, shelter building, and of course, mastering the use of firearms for safety. The journey to my starting point was an exploration through the untamed landscapes of the Teton Range, Wyoming, a challenging yet breathtaking sight, far from the city's hustle and bustle I was accustomed to. The first night was the definition of peace. I set up camp on a remote ridgeline, the view of the valley below stretching out under an infinite sprinkle of stars. The cold mountain air seeped into my lungs, clearing my mind of all burdens. The sound of crickets and rustling leaves was a natural symphony that lulled me to sleep, giving me a sense of absolute freedom, an antithesis to the monotonous routine I knew. The next day, I woke up with a burning spirit. I decided to explore the surrounding area, discovering a small stream that meandered through rocks and lush trees. I chose a quiet riverbank to rest and prepare lunch. After a full stomach, I took the opportunity to practice my shooting skills. I set up a temporary target from an old can across the river and repeatedly fired shots. The booming sound of my .308 caliber rifle broke the forest silence, but I was confident the noise wouldn't attract much attention in such a vast forested area. I felt completely in control, a personal pride in the skills I possessed. As I was engrossed, a series of return shots suddenly rang out, far more intense and voluminous than my own. It wasn't just one or two bursts, but a barrage of shots that sounded like many weapons, perhaps automatic rifles echoing back and forth. Something was wrong. This wasn't the sound of a regular hunter. My survival instinct immediately screamed at me to return to the camp. I didn't know who or what was shooting, but what was clear was that it wasn't something I wanted to get involved in. My mind immediately jumped to the possibility of illegal activities like large-scale poaching or even criminal group activity that is sometimes reported in remote areas. Upon arriving at the camp, my adrenaline was still pumping fast. I quickly cleaned my rifle and rechecked all my gear. I decided to camp again that night, but with maximum caution. I cooked a simple dinner, keeping the fire small and as hidden as possible. That night felt much longer and colder. I huddled inside the tent, every small sound making me tense, hoping the night would pass without further incident. I even briefly considered leaving the place then and there, but the logistics of dismantling the camp in total darkness felt too risky. However, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a sound that tore through the tranquility. Initially, I thought it was just a nightmare, but then I heard it again. A heart-wrenching scream, like an unbearable cry of pain, echoed from the darkness. It was followed by another sound, a woman's voice screaming for help. My heart pounded fast, pumping blood so quickly I could hear it in my ears. The sound came from the same direction as the shots I had heard that afternoon, about a mile from my position. I grabbed my rifle, my hands trembling. Every fiber of my being screamed to run over there, to help her. But my common sense screamed louder. I was just one person, alone in the wilderness against an unknown number. What could I do? Could I, in fact, become the next victim? I tried hard to think rationally. I tried to focus my hearing, identifying the exact direction of the sound. For a moment, I even thought about turning on my headlamp and recording the sound as evidence. But fear paralyzed every brave action. I lay motionless inside the tent, praying for the screams to stop, hoping for a miracle. Finally, a single shot, which sounded closer this time, ended all the noises. After that, there was only a chilling silence. I spent the rest of the night in suffocating fear, waiting for dawn to break, every shadow outside the tent feeling like a threat. When the orange hue began to touch the horizon, I didn't waste a second. With trembling hands, I packed all my belongings as quickly as possible, throwing them into my bag. I didn't care about neatness or comfort. The important thing was to get out of there. The journey home that was supposed to take a full day, I completed in less than 12 hours. I kept moving, not stopping for a break, as if something invisible was chasing me. Every few minutes I would look back, gripping my rifle tightly, searching for unusual shadows or movements among the trees. Even though I was back in civilization, the thought of what had happened continued to haunt me. Guilt gnawed at me, keeping me from sleeping soundly. I didn't know what to do. Report it to the police without concrete evidence? Just a voice and screams in the middle of the forest. They might think I was delusional or watched too many horror movies. I decided to say nothing. A few months later, while reading local online news related to crime in Teton County, a small article caught my attention. The title was vague, "Case of Violence in Remote Area Uncovered." Curiosity, and perhaps a slight subconscious urge, made me click the link. The details were shocking. A criminal gang known for using remote forested areas for their illegal activities, including poaching and smuggling, had just been arrested. They were accused of kidnapping a young woman who was hiking alone, torturing her at their hidden camp, and then shooting her when she tried to escape. Tears welled up as I read the sentence. Miraculously, the victim survived and managed to reach the highway, where she was found by a passing motorist. The criminal gang had been apprehended thanks to the woman's testimony and the evidence found at the scene. Although I was relieved the woman survived, a sharp sense of guilt still enveloped me. I had heard her screams. I had a chance to act, even just to contact the authorities from afar. But I chose to run. I don't dare call myself a hero because I know I don't deserve it. I am just a regular person who, in an extreme situation, did what I thought was right to survive. However, the price of my choice is a sense of shame and regret that I will carry for the rest of my life.